Good afternoon. My name is Katsuya Mane. I'm with Path Robotics, and I'll be chairing this keynote session on human-robot interaction. And so thank you for coming. Welcome to the session. So as you see on the screen, we have 4 talks from excellent speakers. And as the title suggests, this session is about human-robot interaction. And so as a chair, I was asked to introduce the session. So I'm going to try to do that. So, so as you can see in this very elaborate diagram, so this is about human and robot interacting with each other. But of course, these entities or agents are not interacting in isolation. Usually they are in some kind of environment. And of course, the human can naturally understand the environment and act accordingly. But that also means that the robot needs to do the same. So it needs to understand what kind of environment it is in. And that might determine the context and everything about human-robot interaction. So in other words, the robot needs to adapt to the environment that that's working in. And then the other thing that will be covered in this session is that the question of can we come up with some sort of foundation model for human-robot interaction. There's a lot of things going on in this direction right now, and including in robotics. But human-robot interaction is, of course, one of the more complex case or application of robotics. And is there a way to come up with a foundation model kind of thing for this human-robot interaction? That's kind of maybe next big question that we might have to answer as a community. So yeah, that kind of gives you the framework of what this session is about. And for individual talks, we're gonna start with Sonia, talking about how the robot needs to perceive and adapt to the environment that's in. And then Donghui will talk about how robots should read human intention. And then Harold will talk about this challenging question about foundation model for human-robot interaction. And last not but least, Holly is going to, I think, talk about a lot of things, but one of the things is how the robot should show its intent to human through various interfaces, and what is design important things in designing such a system. So that's kind of a very, very brief overview of the session, and I'd like to invite Sonia to the stage to start her talk.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Sonia Chernova. I'm from Georgia Tech. And I'm going to talk about autonomy in homes and household robots, and particularly how do we develop robots that handle the diversity of natural human lives, like messy human lives. And as we've seen, all right, I'm figuring out this remote. Give me a second. All right, as we've seen through many talks at ICRA and other conferences, robot learning has gotten more and more advanced over the last few years. Robots are able to pick up objects, open drawers, and execute short, plans following language commands better than they could in previous years. And all these fundamental abilities for robotic systems mean that we can now take a step back. And what I want you to do with me is imagine what does it look like when we put these robots in our homes, right? And so if somebody is living at home alone right now, and one day they get a robot, what does that interaction look like? What does the robot do? So obviously, if the user says, get me water, get me a bottle of water, the robot should go follow that command and get you a bottle of water. But what does the robot do when the user's asleep, when the user's out of the house, when they're getting ready for their day? Does the robot just stand there waiting for the next verbal command, or does it actually do something, right? And that brings us to this really important point that I think as we envision these autonomous systems, we imagine proactivity. We imagine these robots anticipating our needs and doing something without constantly being told what to do. And so that's the keystone I want to talk about today, is what does it look like when we develop proactive systems? And in particular, I want to talk about things we've sort of figured out in the last few years and things that are still open problems. And I'll try to touch on open problems, especially for students in the audience, because there's so many things we could continue to explore in this area. And as we touch on proactivity, think about now robots taking initiative and doing things in your own home. You might also start to question their behavior. And so this really brings a spotlight onto interpretability and explainability of robot behavior. That's another topic I want to touch on. And last but not least, I want to talk about simulation, which is kind of like in the background, the driving force behind all of this work that's fueling all of this research. So these are the three things I want to talk about. I'll talk about things that work. I'll talk about some things that don't work and some open challenges, things we don't yet know. And I'll start with proactivity, okay? So if we imagine robots in our home, right, doing things that we didn't necessarily ask them to do, one of the first things we think of is cleaning our house. We want robots, everyone wants a robot to clean their house for them, right? Every single one of us would like that pretty much. And so this, in AI, is known as the object rearrangement problem. The issue is, okay, so you have an environment, you have a new object, and you need to know where the robot should place it. And this has been a really active area of work for the last 5-6 years, with a lot of really great advances. And I'm going to give a quick overview of where we are in some of that work, and not all of this that I'm mentioning here is ours. But what I would want to convey is kind of the high-level view of where we are, is that we can characterize approaches roughly into are they LLM-based or not LLM-based. And what we're seeing is that with the advent of LLM-based technologies, the performance and the accuracy of placing an object has gotten a lot better, because LLMs carry, like, they embed within them so much semantic knowledge about our human lives that we now have models that sort of for free enable us to place objects better than we could before. And another added benefit is that users actually like the placements that we get from these LLM-based models even better. And so this is great. Let me give you an overview of how would you use an LLM for something like this, right? And we're no longer talking to the robot here. The robot's being proactive. But what it does is drives around your house. It observes, over time, some examples of how you like to organize things in a personalized way. And here we're using text descriptions to capture a description of each scene, to aggregate those into summaries or rules about how that person, particular individual, likes their house arranged, so that when the robot is now faced with a new object it needs to place, it's able to reconcile the difference between the current environment and those rules in order to place that object. And so this is a quick overview of like where we are on object rearrangement. Obviously, there's a whole family of techniques with different characterizations within this space. But this gives us a first taste of proactivity, right? Because now the robot's not picking up each object based on our language, it's doing that on its own. Here we're only considering one thing though, which is I have an object, where do I put it? And that where is really important, but we also want to consider other aspects, such as when and what is the user doing. And so here's another example we might want to consider with proactivity. Here the robot says, I brought you oatmeal because you usually have it with coffee, right? So this is another variant of object rearrangement. I rearranged the oatmeal. But instead of putting it away, I'm bringing it to the user at a particular instance in time based on the knowledge of the user's routines and in accordance with the current action and activity of the person, right? And so now this is a much richer definition of proactivity, one that we call longitudinal proactive robot assistance, where we're looking at proactivity over the course of minutes or maybe half an hour or even an hour, where the robot can anticipate user needs and take actions across the household in order to perform proactive behaviors. And there's many ways you can think about how does the robot make these decisions about what to do and when, and what information does it base those decisions on. For example, we can build models that consider the current state of the environment and the current time of day. And based on observations, it can say, okay, normally at this time of day, you bring out the oatmeal, so I will do that for you. And such simple models already works, actually to me, surprisingly well, but not nearly quite well enough. And so we can add more. We can feed more information to these models. You can model these as graph neural networks, for example. And you can incorporate past history of what's been going on at home. If you have activity recognition on your robot, you can incorporate that as well. And so with each of this new source of information, You can build more and more complex but very personalized models. Again, these are very personalized to a particular routine and habit of a user in order to get better and better productivity. Getting to 100% productivity is really hard because we're humans, we're messy, sometimes we skip breakfast, right, and we're rushing out the door. So 100% prediction of what people want to do is I think, sort of really, really hard. But that's, I'll try to come back to that in simulation. There's a lot more we could talk about productivity. For the sake of time, I'm going to sort of move on from here, but I do want to mention that one last thing, which is as we start to actually get robots out into the real world and put them in front of users and start to have them do proactive behaviors, what we learn is there's a lot of opinions that happen from users, right? People are like, oh, I like that. Oh, I really didn't like that. I thought I would want it folding my laundry, and I do, but maybe not when I'm right next to it because that makes me uncomfortable. And so there's a lot more work. This is work, we've done some work in this, but again, an open problem is how do you personalize these kinds of technologies better in the future. But for the sake of time, I want to move on. I want to move on to this idea of interpretability. Let's talk about what does it mean for the robot to be interpretable, and what should it talk about. And I have like a lot of thoughts. I'm happy to talk with folks offline about interpretability and XAI, but the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, for robotic systems operating in the home is that if something goes wrong, the robot should be able to explain it, right? We shouldn't enter a room, have the robot just kind of stopped. We've all seen robots, right, just standing there not doing anything without being able to get some sort of explanation about what happened or why it didn't complete the task that it was intending. And as we're developing, as researchers, as we're developing these techniques, we want to benefit the user, and there's a question of how do you measure benefit? How do you measure explicitly from a research perspective the benefit of explanation? And the way, to me, that makes the most sense, that I'm starting to see more and more in the community, and I really love this approach, is to measure user knowledge gain, right? Because what an explanation is, if I explain something to you, you have gained knowledge, right? You know something you didn't before. And if I can measure in our user what they knew before and what they knew after seeing explanations for the robot, not just their opinion of whether the explanation made sense, but how do I measure the information gain? That when we see is sometimes if we give no explanations, which is the bottom line there, people learn, but very slowly. We're amazing machine learning systems, right? Through exposure, we get better and better. We're not learning very much, but with explanations, you see this knowledge gain being much, much higher. And that's what we want to see as a result of these interpretable systems. That leaves us still with the question of what does the robot actually say? What should it, and that remains an open question, again, for research. But one thing that we've started to come together about as a community is the idea of concept-based explanations and their values. That we're not explaining at the level of features, low-level features the robot's thinking about, but in the form of human interpretable attributes and abstractions. Oh, this glass is full, this glass is upright, whatever it is, right? So we need to be able to abstract our language, and that abstraction can be hard to get. With a lot of post hoc methods, we use approximations, and we lose the fidelity of our explanation. So another approach, another thing to mention if you're getting into this line of work is that looking for high fidelity explanations that accurately reflect the true underlying decision making of the system, as opposed to being like approximations of that reasoning. And the last topic on this, I will say, is there's a lot of really interesting work on if you start to look at explainability and transparency of multi-robot systems. We've done a little bit, we've scratched the surface as a community, but there's a lot more challenges as you start to deal with multiple robots, but I'm not gonna touch on it too much right now. What I do want to jump to is simulation as sort of the underlying building block upon what all of this is based on. Now, simulation is great. We all love simulators. We know the value of simulators. They're very safe. It's easy and cheap to get data. We can train all kinds of models, right? The caveat is that there's no perfect simulator, right? And every simulator, like with little bugs and nuances we have about simulators, AI models and machine learning models learn to cheat and take advantage of them. So here's one example. It's quite famous. This is from OpenAI 2019. This is hide and seek, if you haven't seen it. So we have a hider hiding behind these walls. We have a seeker who can't get over these walls. So the hider should be winning this game of hide and seek. But watch what happens with the seeker. What it does is it takes this block over here, it climbs on, and by walking on the box moves, right? That's not how physics works. This is a bug in the simulator. But the RL algorithm has learned to exploit it. Will this work in the real world? No, thank you, right? So this is, the seeker is going to win here. So this is not good sim to real transfer. And this is not an only example. There's Victoria Krakovna at DeepMind keeps a list of all the times in published work that this happens, and it's a very, very long list. So the question is, how can we continue to train robots in HRI and elsewhere on these imperfect simulators while ensuring that our performance actually works in the real world? And I want to bring this back to HRI because we're really looking at interactive systems. And I want to take a lesson from robot navigation. And there we've introduced this concept of sim-to-real predictivity, that you can actually optimize a simulator by recreating these two pictures on the left. The top one is real, a real room in our CODA building here in Atlanta, and the bottom one is that room in simulation. And you can tune the simulator to maximize productivity. That performance in simulation actually is an accurate predictor of real-world performance, and as a result, get better transfer and sim-to-real transfer. So I'm really curious, what does that look like if we move from just navigation for regular robots, if we move to social navigation? This is just a video of habitat, but social navigation, social interaction, all kinds of other social aspects. What does it mean to optimize sim-to-real productivity for HRI? I have no idea. I don't have an answer. That's going to be maybe a talk in 5 years. But I'd love to explore that question with you. So I'm just going to wrap up. Say to me, I talked very briefly about 3 things. To me, the things we do in simulation are very powerful and can help drive advances in HRI if we can figure out this sim-to-real gap. And as we develop more capable robots with the aid of simulation and other technologies, we're going to need more proactivity. So there's a lot of open problems there. And all that need for proactivity is going to drive the need for predictability of these autonomous systems. And with that, I'd like to thank all of my many co-authors. These are the folks whose work I've mentioned, as well as the funding sources for this work. Thank you. I could repeat the question. I'll repeat it.
So how do you envision connecting language to physical actions?
So the question is, with LLMs being used more commonly in robotics, how do we envision connecting language to physical actions that robots are executing? And I think there's a number of examples, of course, using language as input to to specify the objective. I skirted over that because I think there's a lot of other uses for LLMs and language because of their rich semantics. And ultimately what LLMs are these really, really rich semantic models that carry a lot of knowledge. And a lot of priors, but what they struggle with is personalization and adaptation to any particular user. If you really start, they give a really good average, right, and a really good baseline, and they can personalize to some degree. But there's a limit to that, and so depending on the application, then you start to want to move into other models if you're really looking for personalized techniques. And now we have more mics.
Okay, thank you.